October 15, 2024. A blind boy stood trembling as laughter erupted around him. His own father, a billionaire, watching from across the schoolyard but doing nothing to stop it. Then a little girl with scraped knees and worn-out shoes stepped forward, and what she said next silenced every single person there. But would her courage be enough to break a father's silence and save a boy who couldn't even see the cruelty surrounding him? The autumn sun blazed over Crestwood Academy's manicured lawn, casting long shadows across the private school's courtyard. 12-year-old Ethan Harrington stood frozen near the fountain, his white cane trembling in his grip. His unseeing eyes stared straight ahead while cruel laughter surrounded him like a tightening noose. "Look at him. He can't even find his own backpack." The voice belonged to Mason Griffith, a 13-year-old with gelled hair and a smirk that seemed permanently etched on his face. He dangled Ethan's navy backpack just out of reach, swinging it like a trophy while a circle of children howled with delight. Ethan's hand reached forward, fingers grasping at empty air. "Please, I need that. My medication's inside." "Your medication?" Mason mocked, his voice dripping with theatrical sympathy. "Oh no, guys, we better give it back. What if the blind kid gets sick?" More laughter erupted. Sneakers scuffed against pavement as the circle tightened. Someone pushed Ethan from behind, sending him stumbling forward. His cane clattered to the ground, spinning away across the concrete. Panic flashed across his face as he dropped to his knees, palms scraping the rough surface as he searched desperately for his only guide. "Where'd it go?" another boy jeered. "Maybe if you open your eyes wider, you'll see it." The cruelty wasn't new. It never was. But today felt different, sharper, more vicious. Perhaps because the autumn air carried their voices further, or perhaps because of the man standing 60 feet away, watching everything unfold. Richard Harrington, CEO of Harrington Industries, stood beside the headmaster near the school's main entrance. His tailored suit cost more than most teachers earned in a month. His leather shoes gleamed. His salt and pepper hair was perfectly styled. But his face remained stone-cold, expressionless, as he watched his son crawl on the ground. The headmaster, Dr. Bernard Whitfield, shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Harrington, perhaps we should intervene." "No." Richard's voice was clipped, final. "Ethan needs to learn to handle himself." "But sir, those children are..." "Building character," Richard interrupted, his eyes never leaving his son. "The world won't coddle him. Neither will I." Dr. Whitfield fell silent, though his jaw tightened. He'd seen many things in 30 years of education, but a father watching his disabled son being tormented without flinching? That was new. Back at the fountain, Ethan's fingers finally found his cane. He clutched it like a lifeline, pulling himself upright. His knees were scraped, his hands dirty, but he steadied his breathing and turned his face toward where he thought Mason stood. "Just give me my bag," Ethan said quietly. "Please." Mason laughed louder, tossing the backpack to another boy. "Come and get it." The bag flew through the air. Ethan lunged toward the sound but crashed into the fountain's edge instead. Pain exploded across his shin. He bit back a cry, refusing to give them the satisfaction. That's when she appeared. A small figure darted through the crowd like a bolt of lightning. She was no more than 8 years old, her dark skin gleaming with sweat, her cornrows slightly unraveled, her yellow dress faded and patched at the hem. Her name was Zara Mitchell, and she wasn't supposed to be anywhere near Crestwood Academy's pristine grounds. But there she stood, small fists clenched at her sides, her eyes blazing as she positioned herself directly between Ethan and his tormentors. "Leave him alone." Her voice cracked but carried across the courtyard like a bell. The laughter stopped. Every head turned. Mason's smirk faltered. "Who are you?" he sneered. "You don't even go here." Zara's chin lifted. "I don't care. You're being mean, and mean is wrong no matter where you go to school." Silence fell over the courtyard. Even Richard Harrington's expression shifted slightly, his eyes narrowing as he studied the small girl who had done what he refused to do. Zara reached down, grabbed Ethan's backpack from where it had fallen, and walked it directly to him. She placed it gently in his hands. "Here," she said softly. "You okay?" Ethan's fingers closed around the familiar fabric. His voice was barely a whisper. "Who are you?" "Someone who sees what they won't," Zara replied, her gaze sweeping across the silent crowd. And in that moment, everything changed. The Harrington mansion sprawled across 5 acres of manicured perfection in Woodland Heights, the most exclusive neighborhood in the city. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked gardens that required a team of 6 to maintain. Inside, marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers, and every surface whispered wealth. But wealth couldn't fill the silence that lived in Ethan's world. That evening, he sat alone in his bedroom, a space larger than most apartments. His fingers traced the braille labels on his bookshelf, finding the novel he'd been reading. The room was designed for a blind child, everything organized, everything predictable. Yet it felt more like a carefully constructed cage than a sanctuary. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," Ethan called, knowing by the gentle rhythm it was Mrs. Patricia Chen, the housekeeper who'd cared for him since his mother's death 4 years ago. "Dinner's ready, sweetheart," Patricia said, her voice warm. She was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and hands that always smelled of vanilla from her baking. "Your father's working late again, but I made your favorite, pot roast." Ethan's shoulders sagged. He saw what happened today, didn't he? Patricia hesitated. She'd worked for the Harringtons long enough to know when truth was more important than comfort. "Yes, honey, he did. And he didn't do anything. It wasn't a question." Patricia sat beside him on the bed, her hand finding his. "Your father, he's complicated, Ethan. After your mother passed, something in him changed. He thinks if he toughens you up, the world won't hurt you as much." "But it does hurt," Ethan whispered. "Every single day." Patricia squeezed his hand. "I know, baby. I know." Later that night, Richard Harrington stood in his study, a glass of scotch untouched on his mahogany desk. The room was lined with awards, plaques, and photographs documenting his rise from middle-class obscurity to billionaire status. But there was one photograph he avoided. His late wife, Caroline, holding newborn Ethan, her smile radiant. She died when Ethan was 8, a sudden aneurysm that gave no warning, no chance for goodbye. The boy had been sick that week with a high fever. The doctors later said the virus had traveled to his optic nerves, stealing his sight within months. Richard had blamed himself. If he'd gotten better doctors sooner, if he'd noticed the symptoms earlier, if he'd been home instead of closing a deal in Singapore, he couldn't finish those thoughts. So instead, he buried them beneath work, beneath control, beneath the belief that teaching Ethan to endure pain was the same as protecting him from it. His phone buzzed. A text from Dr. Whitfield. "We need to discuss today's incident. Several parents are concerned." Richard deleted it without responding. Across town, in a cramped studio apartment above a laundromat, Zara Mitchell sat cross-legged on a threadbare couch, helping her grandmother sort buttons. The apartment smelled of fabric softener and the lavender candles her grandmother burned to mask the building's mustiness. "Tell me about your day, baby girl," Grandma Rose said, her weathered hands moving with practiced efficiency. Zara hesitated, then the words tumbled out. She described the fancy school she'd passed on her way home from the public library, the boy with the white cane, the cruel laughter, and how she couldn't just walk by. Grandma Rose stopped sorting, her full attention on Zara. "You stood up for him?" "I had to, Grandma. Nobody else would. Even his daddy just stood there watching." Grandma Rose's expression softened with pride and concern. "That was brave, Zara. But that school, those people, they don't take kindly to folks like us speaking up." "I don't care," Zara said firmly. "Mama always said doing right matters more than doing easy." At the mention of her daughter, Rose's eyes misted. Zara's mother had passed 2 years ago, leaving Rose to raise her granddaughter on a fixed income and the wages from her job at a dry cleaner. They had little, but Rose made sure Zara had love, values, and the courage to use her voice. "Your mama was right," Rose said quietly. "But courage has a cost, sweetheart. Promise me you'll be careful." Zara nodded, but her mind was already elsewhere. thinking of the blind boy who'd whispered thank you as she'd pressed his backpack into his hands. Back at the mansion, Ethan lay in bed, unable to sleep. His fingers touched the fresh bandage on his shin where he'd crashed into the fountain. The physical pain would fade, but the humiliation wouldn't. Yet something else lingered, a voice. Her voice. Someone who sees what they won't. For the first time in months, Ethan felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest. Not hope exactly, but something close to it. Someone had stood up for him. A stranger. A little girl who owed him nothing. In his study, Richard finally picked up his scotch and drank deeply, trying to drown the image of his son on his knees while he'd done nothing. And in her small apartment, Zara stared at the ceiling, wondering if she'd ever see that boy again, and if she did, whether she'd have the courage to speak up twice. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp air that promised winter's approach. Ethan navigated Crestwood Academy's hallways with practiced caution, his cane tapping a steady rhythm against polished floors. Students flowed around him like water around a stone, present but distant, careful not to touch, careful not to engage. In the homeroom, he took his usual seat in the back corner. The chair beside him remained perpetually empty, a buffer zone no one dared cross. Mrs. Lauren Brennan, his homeroom teacher, called attendance with mechanical efficiency, her voice never softening when she reached his name. Harrington, Ethan. Here, he responded quietly. The morning proceeded like every other. In English class, when Mr. David Foster asked students to partner up for a reading assignment, Ethan sat alone while pairs formed around him. Foster glanced his way, opened his mouth as if to intervene, then closed it again. Instead, he assigned Ethan independent work, his voice carrying forced cheerfulness. Ethan, why don't you use the audio version in the resource room? That'll work better for you. It was always like this, separation disguised as accommodation, isolation packaged as special treatment. At lunch, the cafeteria buzzed with energy. Ethan carried his tray carefully, using his cane to navigate between tables. He'd memorized the layout weeks ago. 17 steps from the food line to the table near the windows where he always sat alone. 16 steps. 17. He reached for the table's edge. His tray lurched violently, food spilling across his shirt as someone yanked it from his hands. Spaghetti sauce splattered his uniform. Laughter erupted instantly. Oops. Mason's voice dripped with mock innocence. Didn't see you there, Harrington. Oh wait, you're the one who can't see. The cafeteria roared. Even some teachers at the monitoring table glanced over but quickly looked away, suddenly fascinated by their sandwiches. Ethan stood frozen, sauce dripping down his chest, the smell of marinara overwhelming. His hands shook as he tried to locate his cane, which had clattered away during the collision. Need help finding your stick? Mason taunted. Or maybe you should just crawl? A girl's voice joined in, Stephanie Porter, Mason's usual sidekick. My dad says your dad donated a whole new science wing. Guess that's why you still go here even though you can't keep up. The words hit harder than the physical assault. Ethan's jaw clenched. His father's money, always his father's money, buying his place in a school where no one wanted him. Leave him alone. A timid voice emerged from somewhere nearby. Ethan couldn't place who it belonged to. Mind your business, Rodriguez, Mason snapped. The timid voice fell silent immediately. Ethan finally located his cane. He straightened, sauce-stained and trembling, and walked toward what he hoped was the exit. He miscalculated, bumping into a chair. More laughter followed him like a shadow. In the bathroom, he scrubbed at his shirt with rough paper towels. The door creaked open. You okay, kid? It was Mr. James Murphy, the janitor, his voice gruff but kind. Fine, Ethan lied. That's the third accident this month, Murphy said carefully. You know, I could talk to the headmaster. Please don't. Ethan's voice cracked. It'll just make things worse. Murphy sighed heavily. Does your old man know about this? Ethan's silence was answer enough. That afternoon, Richard Harrington sat in a board meeting, his attention divided between quarterly projections and his phone. He'd received 3 calls from Dr. Whitfield that he'd ignored. When his assistant, Monica Hayes, slipped him a note during the presentation, he barely glanced at it. Headmaster Whitfield called again. Urgent regarding Ethan. Richard crumpled the note and refocused on the profit margins displayed on the screen. Ethan needed to be stronger. That was all. Coddling wouldn't help. After school, Ethan waited outside for his driver, Marcus Powell, a quiet man in his 60s who'd worked for the family for 15 years. As Ethan stood by the designated pickup spot, a soccer ball suddenly slammed into his legs, knocking him off balance. He stumbled but didn't fall. "Sorry, didn't see you," a boy called out, though the snickering suggested otherwise. The ball came again, then again, each time accompanied by hollow apologies and barely suppressed laughter. Ethan gripped his cane tighter, his knuckles white, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing him react. Marcus finally arrived, exiting the Mercedes quickly. "Mr. Ethan, I apologize for the delay." He stopped short, taking in the scene. His eyes hardened as he looked at the boys with the soccer ball. "Get in the car, son." Once inside, Marcus met Ethan's eyes in the rearview mirror. "How long has this been going on?" "Since I started here," Ethan admitted quietly. "Since the beginning of the school year." "Does your father know?" Ethan turned toward the window, though he couldn't see the passing scenery. "He knows. He just doesn't care." Marcus's hands tightened on the steering wheel, but he said nothing more at a tea home. Patricia met them at the door, her face creased with concern as she saw the stains on Ethan's uniform. "What happened?" "Another accident," Ethan said flatly, using the word that had become shorthand for cruelty. Patricia's lips pressed into a thin line. She helped him upstairs, running a bath and laying out fresh clothes. As he soaked in the warm water, trying to wash away more than just the marinara sauce, he heard raised voices downstairs. Patricia rarely raised her voice, but tonight was different. "Mr. Harrington, that boy is being tormented, and you're doing nothing. I'm teaching him resilience." Richard's voice was cold, controlled. "You're teaching him that he's alone, that even his own father won't protect him. My father never protected me, and I turned out fine." "Did you?" Patricia's question hung in the air like an accusation. "Because from where I'm standing, you've built walls so high you can't even see your own son suffering." A heavy silence followed. Then Richard's footsteps retreating to his study, the door closing with finality. That night, Ethan lay in bed, his mind replaying every humiliation. The laughter in the cafeteria, the soccer ball striking his legs, the accidents that happened daily, his father's deliberate absence. He thought about the girl from Friday, Zara. She'd appeared like something from a dream, defending him when no one else would. But she hadn't returned. Why would she? She didn't belong to his world of private schools and inherited privilege. In the darkness, Ethan made a decision. He would stop expecting rescue. Stop hoping his father would change. Stop believing anyone would ever truly see him as more than the blind boy everyone pitied or tormented. He would become invisible by choice, shrinking into corners, making himself smaller, less noticeable, less of a target. It was easier than hoping. Across town, Zara sat at the small kitchen table, struggling with math homework by the light of a single lamp. Grandma Rose worked a double shift, leaving Zara alone with her thoughts. She couldn't stop thinking about the boy from the fountain. She'd returned to the school twice since Friday, watching from across the street during dismissal, hoping to catch a glimpse of him. Today, she'd seen the soccer ball incident, seen the way no adults intervened, seen the resignation in the boy's posture as he climbed into an expensive car. Zara didn't understand wealth, but she understood loneliness. She understood what it felt like to be invisible, to have people look through you as if you didn't exist. Tomorrow, she decided she would go back. Not to watch from across the street, but to speak up again. Because someone had to. Tuesday morning brought rain, the kind that turned city streets into mirrors and made Zara's worn sneakers squish with every step. She'd left early, telling Grandma Rose she wanted extra time at the library before school. It wasn't entirely a lie. She did love the library. But today, her path led past Crestwood Academy's iron gates. She stood across the street, hood pulled low, watching luxury cars deposit students beneath covered walkways. Nobody got wet here. Nobody had to run through puddles or arrive at school with soaked socks. Then she saw him. Ethan emerged from a black Mercedes, his driver holding an umbrella over him. But the moment Marcus returned to the car, the umbrella disappeared, and Ethan stood alone in the rain. His cane tapped uncertainly as he navigated toward the building entrance. "Hey, Harrington." Mason's voice cut through the downpour. "Need help finding the door?" A group of boys huddled under the awning, dry and comfortable, watching Ethan struggle. Not one moved to help. Zara's fists clenched. Her grandmother's warning echoed in her mind. "Courage has a cost, sweetheart." But her feet were already moving. She darted across the street, rain soaking through her thin jacket. "Here," she said, slightly breathless as she reached Ethan. "I got you." Ethan froze at the familiar voice. "You came back." "Yeah, well." Zara gently touched his elbow, guiding him toward the awning. "Somebody's got to make sure you don't drown out here." The boys under the awning stared as Zara led Ethan past them. Mason's face twisted with contempt. "Great, now the blind kid needs a bodyguard. And she doesn't even go here." Zara spun to face him, water dripping from her braids. "No, I don't. But at least I know how to be a decent human being. That's something money can't buy." Before Mason could respond, a sharp voice cut through the tension. "What's going on here?" Mrs. Angela Thornton, the school's vice principal, approached with clipped steps, her expression severe. She was a woman in her 40s who wore authority like armor and had little patience for disruptions. "This girl doesn't attend Crestwood," Mason said quickly, pointing at Zara. "She's trespassing." Mrs. Thornton's eyes swept over Zara, taking in her soaked clothes, her scuffed shoes, and the defiant tilt of her chin. "Is this true? Are you a student here?" Zara lifted her chin higher. "No, ma'am. But I was just helping." "Then you need to leave immediately. This is private property." Mrs. Thornton's tone allowed no argument. But she was only... Ethan started. "Mr. Harrington, please proceed to class. You're going to be late." Mrs. Thornton's attention remained fixed on Zara. "Young lady, I won't ask again." Zara's jaw tightened, but she nodded. Before turning away, she squeezed Ethan's hand quickly. "Don't let them win," she whispered. As Zara walked back through the rain, Mrs. Thornton's voice followed her. "If I see you on these grounds again, I'll call the police." Zara didn't look back, but tears mixed with rain on her cheeks. Not from fear or shame, but from anger at the injustice of a world where helping someone could get you threatened with arrest. Inside the school, Ethan stood dripping in the hallway, his heart pounding. She'd come back. For him. A stranger had shown him more kindness in 2 encounters than most people had in months. In the homeroom, he couldn't concentrate. His mind kept returning to Zara's words, "Don't let them win." But how could he fight when he couldn't even see the enemy's face? After school, Zara didn't go straight home. Instead, she walked to the public library, her sanctuary, where Mrs. Eleanor Grant, the elderly librarian, always greeted her with warm smiles and book recommendations. "Rough day, sweetheart?" Mrs. Grant asked, noting Zara's damp clothes and troubled expression. Zara collapsed into her favorite chair by the window. "Miss Eleanor, is it wrong to help someone even if you're not supposed to be there?" Mrs. Grant settled into the chair beside her, her silver hair catching the afternoon light. "Tell me what happened." The story spilled out. The blind boy, the bullies, the fancy school, and the vice principal's threat. Mrs. Grant listened without interruption, her face thoughtful. "Zara," she said when the girl finished, "doing the right thing often means going where we're not invited and speaking when we're told to be quiet. Your mother understood that. She volunteered at shelters, spoke up at city council meetings about affordable housing, and helped people society ignored. Grandma says Mama paid a price for that," Zara said quietly. "She did," Mrs. Grant acknowledged. "But she also changed lives, including mine." She paused, her eyes distant. "Your mother helped me when I was being evicted 15 years ago. She organized a petition, rallied neighbors, and fought the landlord. I kept my home because she refused to stay silent. Zara's eyes widened. I didn't know that. Your grandmother worries because she loves you. But I see your mother's fire in you, child. And this world needs people willing to burn for what's right. That evening, Zara sat with Grandma Rose, helping fold laundry from the dry cleaner. The small apartment smelled of fabric softener and the chicken Rose had left simmering in the slow cooker. Grandma, Zara said carefully, why do rich people get to be mean and nobody stops them? Rose's hands stilled on a shirt she was folding. What brought this on? Zara told her about returning to the school, about being threatened with police. Rose's face tightened with worry and something else. Recognition. Baby girl, the world's not fair. People with money, with power, they have different rules. They can hurt people and call it boys being boys or building character. Meanwhile, folks like us help someone and get called criminals. But that's wrong. Yes, it is. But knowing something's wrong and being able to change it are two different things. Rose cupped Zara's face gently. I don't want you getting hurt trying to save someone whose own daddy won't even protect him. But what if nobody ever tries? Zara's voice cracked. What if everyone just keeps saying it's too hard or too dangerous, and that boy just keeps getting hurt every single day? Rose pulled her granddaughter close, her own eyes misting. She heard her daughter's voice in Zara's words, the same passionate belief that right mattered more than easy. Your mama used to say the same things, Rose whispered, and I was always scared for her, just like I'm scared for you now. Did you ever ask her to stop? Rose pulled back, meeting Zara's eyes. Once. You know what she told me? Zara shook her head. She said, Mama, if I stay quiet to stay safe, I'm not really living. I'm just surviving. Rose's voice broke. 3 months later, she was gone. The memory hung between them, Zara's mother, Lisa Mitchell, who died from an undiagnosed heart condition while organizing a food drive. She'd collapsed carrying boxes, her heart simply giving out at 32. But she lived, Grandma, Zara said softly. Really lived, didn't she? Rose nodded, tears streaming. Yes, baby, she did. That night, Zara lay in bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling. She thought about Ethan's isolation, about his father who watched cruelty without intervening, about teachers who looked away, about students who laughed. She thought about her mother, who'd lived 32 years but had touched more lives than people who lived twice as long. And she made a decision. Tomorrow, she will go back to Crestwood Academy. Not to watch from across the street, but to walk through those gates. Vice principal's threats or not, Ethan needed someone to see him, to stand with him. Because in a world that taught people to look away, sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was refuse to be blind. Across town, in his massive bedroom, Ethan ran his fingers over a braille book, but the words wouldn't register. His mind kept returning to the feeling of Zara's hand guiding him through the rain, her voice fierce as she defended him, her whispered words, "Don't let them win." For the first time in months, a spark flickered in the darkness he lived in. Not hope exactly, but something close, the knowledge that somewhere in the world someone saw him, really saw him. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start fighting back. Wednesday arrived with deceptive calm, the kind of stillness that precedes storms. Crestwood Academy buzzed with its usual morning energy. Students chattering about weekend plans, teachers clutching coffee like lifelines, the hum of privilege operating smoothly. Ethan moved through it all like a ghost, trying to stay small, unnoticed. He'd perfected the art of invisibility. Shoulders hunched, cane movements minimal, never drawing attention. If he could just make it through one day without incident, maybe he could survive another. But today was different. Today, Zara Mitchell walked through Crestwood's front gates with her head held high. Security guard Tom Brennan, a retired cop with a soft heart, spotted her immediately. "Hey, kiddo, you know you can't be here. Mrs. Thornton was pretty clear yesterday." Zara met his eyes steadily. "I'm here to see Ethan Harrington." Tom shifted uncomfortably. "Look, I get it. What you did was kind. But this isn't your school, and I've got orders." "What if it was your kid?" Zara interrupted. "What if someone was hurting your kid every day, and nobody helped because they had orders. Tom's face softened, the conflict evident in his eyes. He'd seen the Harrington boys' daily walks of shame, and had noticed the accidents that happened with suspicious frequency. He'd reported concerns to the administration. Nothing changed. 5 minutes, he said quietly, stepping aside. But if Thornton sees you, I will never let you in. Understood. Zara nodded and slipped inside. She found Ethan in the library during his free period, sitting alone at a table near the back. The room smelled of old books and floor polish. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, creating patterns Ethan couldn't see. Ethan? Zara's voice was soft, careful not to startle him. His head snapped up, surprise crossing his face. Zara? How did you? They told you not to come back. Yeah, well, I'm not great at following rules when the rules are stupid. She slid into the chair beside him. Especially when someone needs help. Ethan's fingers gripped his braille reader. You're going to get in trouble. Real trouble. They might actually call the police. Let them, Zara said with more confidence than she felt. I'm not doing anything wrong. You're the one who needs protecting, not them. For a moment, Ethan sat silent, overwhelmed. Why? He finally whispered. Why do you keep coming back? You don't even know me. Zara considered the question. My mama used to say that knowing someone's name isn't the same as knowing they need help. She said when you see someone hurting, you don't walk past them because they're a stranger. You stop because they're human. Your mama sounds smart. She was. Zara's voice caught. She died 2 years ago. But she taught me that staying quiet when bad things happen makes you part of the bad thing. Ethan turned his face toward her voice, and for the first time Zara saw something shift in his expression. Not just gratitude, but recognition. Someone who understood loss. Someone who understood isolation. My mom died too, Ethan said quietly. 4 years ago. That's when everything changed. When I got sick and lost my sight, my dad just disappeared. Not physically, but in every other way. Before Zara could respond, the library door burst open. Mason Griffith strode in with 5 other boys, their faces lit with predatory excitement. They'd heard rumors that the trespassing girl was back. Well, Mason sneered. Look who's playing the hero again. Didn't learn your lesson yesterday? Zara stood, placing herself between Mason's group and Ethan. Back off. Mason laughed, stepping closer. Or what? You'll tell the teacher? Oh wait, Miss Harper's on lunch duty. He glanced around the empty library. Looks like it's just us. The boys fanned out, surrounding the table. Ethan stood slowly, his cane trembling in his grip. Mason, just leave it alone. Leave it alone. Mason's voice dripped with mock offense. Your little girlfriend trespassed on school property. Again, someone needs to teach her about boundaries. She's not. Ethan started. What's going on here? A new voice, sharp and authoritative, cut through the tension. Everyone turned. Richard Harrington stood in the library doorway, his tailored suit immaculate, his expression unreadable. He'd come for an unannounced visit to discuss the new science wing donation with Dr. Whitfield. Mason's arrogance faltered. Mr. Harrington, we were just... I asked what's going on. Richard's eyes swept the scene. His son cornered, surrounded by boys, and a small girl positioned protectively in front of him. Mason recovered quickly, his voice smoothing into practiced innocence. Sir, this girl doesn't attend Crestwood. She's trespassing. We were just making sure Ethan was safe until a teacher arrived. Richard's gaze shifted to Zara, taking in her worn clothes, her defensive posture, her fierce eyes. Is that so? Zara lifted her chin. That's a lie, and you know it. Gasps rippled through the group. No one spoke to Richard Harrington that way. Mason's face flushed with shock and delight. This girl was done for. Excuse me? Richard's voice dropped dangerously low. I said it's a lie. Zara's voice shook but held firm. They weren't protecting him. They were about to hurt him. Just like they hurt him every day while everyone pretends not to notice. Richard's jaw tightened. That's a serious accusation. It's the truth. Zara's composure cracked, emotion flooding her voice. I've seen it. They take his stuff, they push him, they laugh at him, and nobody stops them. Not the teachers, not the principal, and not you. The library went deathly silent. Mason's face paled. The other boys exchanged nervous glances. No one had ever spoken to Richard Harrington with such raw defiance. Zara, don't. Ethan reached for her, panic in his voice. But Zara couldn't stop. Weeks of watching injustice, of seeing Ethan suffer, of witnessing adults look away. It all came pouring out. You were there, she said, turning fully to Richard. Last week by the fountain. You stood there and watched them hurt your son. And you did nothing. What kind of father does that? The words hung in the air like an explosion's aftermath. Richard's face was drained of color. The boys stood frozen, terrified witnesses to the unthinkable. A child challenging a billionaire. Young lady, Richard started, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. No! Zara cut him off, tears streaming now. You don't get to young lady me. Ethan's your son. He needs you and you just watch like it's a business deal or something. My mama died, and I'd give anything to have her back. But you got your son right here, and you act like he doesn't exist. Richard took a step forward, his face flushed. For a moment, everyone thought he might yell, might throw this child out himself. But then, she's right. Ethan's voice, barely above a whisper, cut through the tension. She's right about all of it. All eyes turned to him. His hands trembled on his cane, but he stood straighter than he had in months. Mason and his friends torture me every single day. Ethan continued, his voice growing stronger. They take my things, they trip me, they humiliate me. And the teachers see it, but they look away because you donate money. Because you're Richard Harrington, and nobody wants to upset you. Richard stood motionless, his son's words hitting like physical blows. And you, Ethan's voice broke. You saw them hurt me, and you chose your stupid lesson about toughness over protecting your own son. Mom would be ashamed of what you've become. The mention of Caroline Harrington shattered something in Richard's carefully constructed armor. His hands clenched at his sides, his breathing heavy. Dad, I'm blind. I'm not broken. But you treat me like I'm both. You treat me like I'm nothing. Tears streamed down Ethan's face. And this girl, this stranger, has shown me more love in 3 days than you have in 4 years. The library door opened again. Mrs. Thornton entered with Dr. Whitfield, both drawn by reports of a disturbance. They stopped short, taking in the scene. Richard Harrington, face flushed with emotion. His son, tears streaming. A small black girl standing between them like a lightning rod, and half a dozen boys looking like they wished they could disappear. Mr. Harrington, Dr. Whitfield said carefully, perhaps we should discuss this in my office. No. Richard's voice was rough, damaged. He looked at his son, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time in years. We discussed it here, now, in front of everyone. He turned to Mason, his expression hardening. You've been bullying my son? Mason's confidence evaporated. Sir, it was just. Answer the question. Yes, sir. Richard's gaze swept the other boys. All of you? Nods reluctantly, shuffling feet. The truth, finally, exposed to light. Richard turned to Dr. Whitfield, his voice cold as steel. You knew about this? Whitfield paled. There were reports, but we addressed them through appropriate channels. By doing nothing. Richard's words were clipped, precise. By protecting these boys because their parents write checks. He looked at Mrs. Thornton. You threatened to call the police on this child for helping my son? Thornton's professional mask cracked. Mr. Harrington, she was trespassing. She was doing what every adult in this building failed to do. She was protecting a child who couldn't protect himself. Richard knelt slowly in front of Zara, his expensive suit knees touching the library floor. His eyes, so similar to Ethan's, were red-rimmed. You're 8 years old? He asked quietly. Yes, sir. And you came here, knowing you'd be in trouble, just to help my son. Zara nodded, her own tears still falling. Richard's voice broke. I'm sorry. You shouldn't have had to. That's my job, and I failed. He looked up at Ethan. I failed him. The room held its breath. A billionaire on his knees, apologizing to a child who owned nothing. The world as Crestwood Academy knew it had just shifted on its axis. Dad. Ethan's voice was small, uncertain. Richard stood, crossing to his son. His hands hovered, uncertain, before finally resting on Ethan's shoulders. I'm sorry, son. I'm so sorry. Your mother would be ashamed of me. And she'd be right. For the first time in 4 years, Ethan leaned into his father's embrace and wept. The library remained frozen in the aftermath of Richard Harrington's apology. Dr. Whitfield's face had gone ashen. Mrs. Thornton clutched her tablet like a shield, and Mason Griffith looked like he might be sick. The other boys edged toward the door, but Richard's voice stopped them cold. No one leaves this room. His tone carried the authority that had built empires, but now it was weaponized for protection rather than profit. He released Ethan from their embrace, though his hand remained on his son's shoulder, an anchor neither wanted to let go. Richard turned to Dr. Whitfield, his eyes blazing. How long has this been happening? Whitfield's professional composure crumbled. Mr. Harrington, if we could discuss this privately. How long? The headmaster's shoulders sagged. There have been incidents since Ethan enrolled in September. Reports from the janitor, a few teachers, even Marcus, your driver. Reports you ignored. Richard's words were surgical in their precision. We addressed them through conflict resolution protocols, Whitfield said weakly. Mediation sessions, conversations with parents. Mediation. Richard's voice rose. My son is being physically assaulted, humiliated daily, and your response is mediation? Mrs. Thornton stepped forward, her voice defensive. Mr. Harrington, with all due respect, Crestwood has procedures. We can't simply expel students without proper documentation. But you can threaten an 8-year-old girl with police action for helping? Richard's gaze could have cut glass. Your priorities are remarkably clear, Mrs. Thornton. Zara, still standing beside Ethan, watched the adults with fierce satisfaction. Finally, someone was listening. Finally, the truth was too loud to ignore. Richard pulled out his phone. I'm calling an emergency board meeting. Today. Sir, that's highly irregular. Whitfield protested. So is allowing systematic abuse in an institution that charges $50,000 a year. Richard's fingers flew across his screen. Every board member, every parent of these boys, the school's attorney, and a reporter from the Tribune. A reporter? Whitfield's face went white. Mr. Harrington, please, think about the school's reputation. I am thinking about it. I'm thinking that an institution that protects bullies over victims doesn't deserve its reputation. Richard hit send on a mass message. The meeting's in 2 hours. My conference room downtown. Attendance is mandatory. He turned to Mason and the other boys, his expression cold. You will sit in the front row. You will tell the truth. And if I hear one lie, one excuse, one attempt to minimize what you've done, I will personally ensure your families understand the full weight of accountability. Mason's bravado had completely evaporated. My dad's going to... Your dad is going to hear exactly what you've been doing, along with everyone else. Richard's voice was iron. This ends today. As Richard made more calls, Mrs. Brennan, the homeroom teacher, appeared in the doorway. Her face was flushed, her hands twisting together nervously. Mr. Harrington? I need to say something. Richard looked up. Yes. I saw things. Throughout the semester. The way the boys treated Ethan. The accidents that weren't accidents. Her voice cracked. I reported it 3 times to the administration. Each time, I was told not to make waves, that your donations were crucial to the new wing, that we needed to handle things delicately. Who told you that? Richard's voice was deadly quiet. Mrs. Brennan's eyes flicked to Whitfield. The headmaster, he said. He said you wouldn't want special attention drawn to Ethan. That you'd prefer he learn to handle things independently. Richard's jaw clenched so hard Zara could see the muscle jumping. He said I would prefer my son be abused in silence? Not in those words, but… Yes, sir. That was the implication. Another voice joined from the hallway. He told me the same thing. Mr. Murphy, the janitor, stepped into the library. He wore his maintenance uniform, a mop bucket still in hand. Told me Mr. Harrington didn't want his son coddled. Said I should mind my own business. Me too, added Miss Sarah Chan, the art teacher, appearing behind Murphy. I watched Mason destroy Ethan's sculpture project, 3 weeks of work. When I tried to report it, Mrs. Thornton said boys will be boys and that I was being oversensitive. The dam had broken. One by one, staff members appeared, drawn by the commotion and emboldened by Richard's fury. Each had a story. Each had been silenced. The teacher described accidents during sports. The librarian mentioned books mysteriously damaged. The lunch monitor detailed food trays accidentally spilled. A pattern emerged, clear and damning, systematic abuse enabled by systematic silence. Ethan stood beside his father, overwhelmed. He'd thought he was alone, invisible, but people had seen. They'd tried to help. They'd been stopped. Why didn't any of you come to me directly? Richard asked, his voice raw. Because you're Richard Harrington, Mr. Murphy said bluntly. Billionaires don't take calls from janitors. And when the administration tells you the billionaire wants things handled a certain way, you believe them. The truth settled over Richard like a weight. His wealth, his status, his reputation, all had been weaponized against his own son. People had assumed his silence meant consent. His emotional distance had been interpreted as instruction. I never said any of that, Richard whispered, more to himself than anyone else. I never wanted this. But you allowed it. Zara's small voice cut through. Everyone turned to her. You saw him getting hurt and you walked away. That's the same as saying it's okay. Richard looked at the 8-year-old girl who'd shown more courage than any adult in the building. You're absolutely right. At 2 p.m., Richard's downtown conference room filled with an uncomfortable crowd. Board members arrived in expensive suits, whispering anxiously. Parents of the accused boys clustered defensively. Teachers stood along the walls. And in the front row sat Mason and his 5 friends, flanked by their increasingly nervous fathers and mothers. Richard stood at the head of the long mahogany table, Ethan beside him in a chair, Zara standing protectively on his other side. The Tribune's education reporter, Jessica Walsh, sat in the corner with her recording device visible. Thank you all for coming on short notice, Richard began, his voice controlled but carrying an edge that made everyone sit straighter. We're here to discuss systematic bullying at Crestwood Academy, the administration's failure to address it, and how my son has been tortured for months while adults looked away. Mason's father, Thomas Griffith, a hedge fund manager, stood abruptly. Now wait just a minute. Sit down, Thomas. Richard's voice cracked like a whip. You'll have your chance to speak after I'm finished. Thomas sat, his face red with anger and embarrassment. Richard detailed everything. The fountain incident he'd witnessed and ignored, the daily humiliations Ethan had endured, the reports filed and dismissed, the staff intimidated into silence. He played audio recordings from his phone, messages from teachers that had been forwarded to him only that afternoon, documentation he demanded from school servers. The evidence was overwhelming, irrefutable. When Richard finished, silence hung heavy. Then he turned to Mason. Stand up and tell everyone what you've done. Mason's face had gone pale, but his father nodded sharply at him. Slowly, Mason stood. I bullied Ethan Harrington. His voice was barely audible. Louder, Richard commanded. I bullied Ethan Harrington. Mason's voice cracked. I took his stuff, pushed him, made fun of him for being blind. I have done it almost every day since school started. Why? Richard asked. Mason's eyes filled with tears. Because everyone laughed. Because it made me feel powerful. Because nobody stopped me. So I thought it was okay. Look at him, Richard said quietly. Look at my son and tell him why you thought hurting him made you powerful. Mason turned to Ethan, tears streaming. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I was wrong. It was cruel and I was wrong. One by one, the other boys stood and confessed. Some cried. Some could barely speak. But each admitted their actions. Thomas Griffith stood again, his voice cold. Richard, boys fight. It's natural. You're blowing this out of proportion. My son is blind. Richard's roar silenced the room. Your son and his friends targeted a disabled child for months. They made his life hell His voice broke. While I told myself it was building character. He looked around the room at the board members, the parents, the administrators. I'm withdrawing my funding for the new science wing. Every dollar. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The new wing represented a $15 million donation. Furthermore, Richard continued, I'm establishing the Caroline Harrington Foundation for Educational Equity, named for my late wife. It will fund anti-bullying programs, accessibility resources, and provide support for students with disabilities. But not 1 cent goes to Crestwood unless there's a complete administrative overhaul. Dr. Whitfield stood, his voice desperate. Mr. Harrington, please reconsider. Dr. Whitfield, you're fired. Effective immediately. Mrs. Thornton, you're fired. I'm recommending the board replace you with administrators who understand that a child's safety matters more than a donor's ego. The reporter's pen flew across her notepad. This was front-page news. Richard turned to the parents of the bullies. Your sons will face consequences. I'm leaving that to the new administration and your own consciences. But know this. If any of you retaliate against my son, against Zara, or against any staff member who came forward today, I will use every resource I have to make your lives very uncomfortable. The meeting dissolved into chaos. Parents arguing, board members scrambling, reporters asking questions. But through it all, Richard kept one hand on Ethan's shoulder and extended his other hand to Zara. Thank you, he said quietly. His voice meant only for her. You saved my son, and you saved me from becoming someone I'd hate. Zara looked up at the billionaire who'd finally found his courage. My mama always said it's never too late to do the right thing. Richard's eyes misted. Your mother raised a remarkable daughter. Outside the conference room, as the crowd dispersed, Patricia Chin waited. She'd come as soon as Richard called her. When she saw Ethan emerge with his father's arm around him, she began to cry. It's over, Mrs. Chun, Ethan said softly. It's really over. Marcus, the driver, stood beside Patricia. He nodded to Richard with quiet respect. Welcome back, sir. Richard understood. He'd been gone emotionally, parentally for 4 years. But today he'd returned. As they walked toward the elevator, Zara tugged Richard's sleeve. Mr. Harrington? What happens to me now? Am I in trouble for trespassing? Richard knelt to her level. Zara, the only thing that happens to you is that you're never in trouble for doing the right thing. Never again. I promise you that. The seeds of justice had been planted. And finally, they were beginning to bloom. 3 months later, winter had settled over the city with the kind of crisp cold that made breath visible and turned morning grass silver with frost. But inside the newly renamed Caroline Harrington Center for Inclusive Education, warmth radiated from every corner. The building that once housed Crestwood Academy's administrative offices had been completely transformed. Gone were the cold marble floors and intimidating oak panels. In their place, colorful murals painted by students, tactile wall guides for visually impaired children, ramps and accessible doorways, and a library filled with books in braille and audio format. Ethan stood in the center's main hall, his cane tapping confidently as he navigated the space he'd helped design. His posture had changed, shoulders back, head high. He moved with purpose now, not fear. Ethan, a familiar voice called out. Over here. He turned toward the sound, a smile breaking across his face. Zara. She bounded over, her footsteps echoing in the spacious hall. But something was different. You're wearing new shoes, Ethan said, his smile widening. Zara laughed. How'd you know? They squeak differently, louder, more confident, like you. He paused. Like the ones my dad bought you last month? Yeah, Zara admitted, a hint of shyness creeping into her voice. Grandma Rose says I'm not supposed to accept expensive gifts, but your dad said they weren't a gift. They were a thank you. There's a difference, apparently. There is, Ethan agreed. Because you can't put a price on what you did for me. The center buzzed with activity around them. Students with various disabilities moved through the halls. Some in wheelchairs, some with hearing aids, some like Ethan with white canes. But more importantly, they moved without fear, without shame, without isolation. Richard Harrington emerged from what had once been Whitfield's office, but was now a student resource center. He carried a stack of folders and wore a sweater instead of his usual suit. Patricia had convinced him that being present meant being approachable. There you two are, he said, his voice warm in a way it hadn't been for years. Zara, your grandmother just called. She's running a few minutes late. They got held up at the bank. The bank? Zara's eyes widened. Is everything okay? Richard's smile broadened. Everything's perfect. The loan for her business went through. Rose's Alterations is officially opening next month. Zara squealed, jumping up and down. When Richard had learned that Grandma Rose had been trying to start her own tailoring business for years but couldn't secure funding, he'd made a few calls. Not as a handout, Rose had been fiercely resistant to that, but as a proper business loan with fair terms and mentorship from Richard's network. She's going to have her own shop? Zara's voice trembled with emotion. On Madison Street, good foot traffic, affordable rent, everything she needs. Richard knelt down to Zara's level, a gesture that had become natural to him over the past months. Your grandmother is a remarkable woman. She deserves this. Patricia appeared from the hallway, carrying a tray of hot chocolate and cookies. Meeting in 5 minutes, everyone. And Ethan, honey, Marcus just texted. He found that audiobook you wanted. The biography of Harriet Tubman? Ethan asked eagerly. That's the one. He's bringing it tonight. Life has changed in profound ways. Patricia had gone from housekeeper to director of student wellness at the center, a role she'd initially protested. I fold laundry, Mr. Harrington, I don't run programs. Until Richard pointed out that she'd been caring for children's well-being her entire career. Now she coordinated support services for students who needed them. Marcus had taken on a new role too. He still drove Ethan, and now Zara when needed. But he'd also begun working with the center's transportation program, ensuring students with disabilities had reliable, safe transit to school. His gentle presence had become a fixture, his quiet strength a comfort to children who needed stability. The meeting Richard had mentioned was in the center's new conference room. Instead of intimidating board members, it was filled with parents, students, and educators genuinely committed to change. Jessica Walsh, the Tribune reporter, sat in the corner. She'd written a series of articles about the Crestwood scandal that had sparked citywide conversations about bullying, privilege, and accountability. Today, she was doing a follow-up piece on transformation. Thank you all for coming, Richard began, standing at the head of the table. But unlike 3 months ago, his tone was collaborative, not commanding. We're here to celebrate our progress and plan for what comes next. The new headmaster, Dr. Michael Torres, stood to present data. Torres was a former special education teacher who'd built his career on inclusion and compassion. Under his leadership, the school had been revolutionized. Since implementing our new protocols, Torres said, we've had 0 bullying incidents reported. 0. Our student satisfaction surveys show a 93% increase in feelings of safety. And perhaps most importantly, students with disabilities report feeling seen and valued. Applause filled the room. But Richard raised his hand. Let's not celebrate too early. 0 reported incidents could mean students still don't trust us enough to report. We need to stay vigilant. Stay humble. Keep listening. Ethan spoke up from his seat. Dad's right. But I can tell you from experience, it feels different now. I walk through hallways and people say hi. Not because they have to, but because they want to. That never happened before. A parent raised her hand, Maria Santos, whose daughter had cerebral palsy. My daughter told me yesterday that she made 3 new friends this week. 3. At her old school, She sat alone every day. This place has given her more than education. It's given to her. Around the table, stories poured out. Small victories that meant everything. A child with autism finding a sensory-friendly quiet room when overwhelmed. A deaf student finally having teachers who knew sign language. A boy with dyslexia discovered that different learning styles weren't deficits but differences. After the meeting, Richard found himself alone with Zara in the hallway. She was studying one of the murals. A painting of children holding hands, each unique, each valued. "Zara," Richard said softly, "can I tell you something?" She turned to him, her expression open and trusting in a way that still humbled him. "When Caroline, my wife, was alive, she used to volunteer at a community center in your neighborhood. She taught art classes to kids who couldn't afford supplies." Richard's voice thickened with emotion. "She always said the most important thing wasn't what you taught, but that you showed up, that you saw people." Zara listened, her hand finding Richard's. "You showed up for my son when no one else would. When I wouldn't." A tear escaped down Richard's cheek. "Caroline would have loved you, and she would have been so ashamed of who I'd become. But you changed," Zara said simply. "My mama used to say people can't undo yesterday, but they can build tomorrow. You're building tomorrow now." Richard pulled her into a hug, the small girl who'd saved his son and, in doing so, saved him. "Your mother was a wise woman, and you're just like her." That evening, the center hosted its first community dinner. Long tables were set up in the gymnasium, filled with food donated by local restaurants. Students, parents, staff, and community members mingled freely. There was no hierarchy here, no divisions of wealth or status. Just people breaking bread together. Ethan sat beside Zara, their laughter mixing with dozens of others. Grandma Rose had arrived, her eyes misty as she watched her granddaughter thrive in this new environment. Patricia served food with a smile that hadn't dimmed in months. Marcus helped set up a microphone for announcements, his quiet competence appreciated by all. Richard stood to speak, tapping his glass gently. 3 months ago, I stood in a conference room and made a lot of promises. Promises about change, about accountability, about creating something better. Tonight, I'm not here to make promises. I'm here to say thank you. He gestured around the room. Thank you to every person who had the courage to speak up. To the staff who broke the silence. To the parents who demanded better. To the students who showed us what inclusion really means. His eyes found Ethan. To my son, who forgave me when I didn't deserve it. Who taught me that strength isn't about enduring pain alone. It's about having the courage to ask for help. Then his gaze settled on Zara. And to a little girl who understood something that took me 50 years to learn. That seeing someone's humanity matters more than their resume. That protecting the vulnerable is more important than protecting reputation. That courage doesn't require size or wealth or power. It just requires heart. Applause erupted, but Richard held up his hand. Caroline used to tell me that legacy isn't what you build, it's who you become. For years, I built towers, made fortunes, and achieved success. But I was becoming someone empty, someone cruel through silence. He looked at the diverse crowd before him. This center isn't named after me. It's named after my wife because she understood what I forgot. That our worth is measured by how we treat those who can't benefit us. And moving forward, that's the only metric that matters. As the evening continued, Ethan and Zara slipped outside to the courtyard. The winter air was sharp, but the space heaters made it comfortable. String lights glowed overhead, creating a canopy of warmth. "Can I tell you something?" Ethan asked, his breath visible in the cold. "Always," Zara replied. "I used to think being blind was the worst thing that could happen to someone. That not seeing meant missing everything important." He paused, his face thoughtful. "But you taught me that some people have perfect vision and still don't see anything that matters." Zara was quiet for a moment. "You know what's weird? I used to think having nothing meant being nothing. That because we were poor, we didn't matter to people like your dad. And now," Ethan asked, "now I know that what you have doesn't make you matter. What you do does. My mama had nothing but a big heart, and she changed people's lives. Your dad had everything and was miserable. But now he's using what he has for good, and that makes him rich in ways money can't buy. They sat in comfortable silence, two children who taught adults what courage meant. Inside, Richard watched them through the window, his heart full in ways he couldn't articulate. Patricia came to stand beside him. They saved each other, you know, she said softly. I know, Richard replied. And they saved me too. As the winter evening deepened and stars appeared above, the Caroline Harrington Center for Inclusive Education glowed with light and life. Inside, people laughed, shared stories, built friendships across divides that had once seemed insurmountable. Mason Griffith, now attending a different school and undergoing therapy for his behavior, had written Ethan a letter. It sat in Ethan's pocket, read and reread. The apology in it was raw, genuine, and painful in its honesty. Ethan hadn't forgiven him yet. Not completely, but he was learning that healing took time. The other boys had scattered to different schools as well. Some had parents who understood accountability. Others didn't. But consequences had been real, and change had begun. Dr. Whitfield and Mrs. Thornton had quietly resigned from education entirely. The board had issued a public apology and implemented sweeping reforms across all their affiliated schools. But most importantly, children who'd once felt invisible were being seen. Children who'd felt powerless were finding their voices. And adults who'd looked away were learning to stand up. As the community dinner wound down and families began heading home, Zara's hand found Ethan's. Thank you for letting me be your friend, she said quietly. Ethan squeezed back. Thank you for seeing me when no one else did. I'll always see you, Zara promised, even when you can't see yourself. Richard drove them home, Ethan to the mansion that finally felt like a home again, and Zara to the small apartment that had always been filled with love. As they pulled up to Zara's building, Rose waited on the steps, her face radiant with pride. Thank you, Mr. Harrington, Rose said as Zara jumped out. For everything. Thank you, Ms. Mitchell, Richard replied. For raising a daughter who raised the rest of us. As Richard and Ethan drove through the city streets, snow began to fall, soft, clean, promising renewal. Dad, Ethan said quietly. Yes, son? I love you. Richard's hands tightened on the wheel, emotion overwhelming him. I love you too, Ethan, and I'm going to spend every day proving it. In the back seat, Ethan smiled. Not because the world was perfect, it wasn't. Not because pain had been erased, it hadn't. But because for the first time in 4 years he felt safe. Seen. Loved. And across town, in a small apartment that smelled of fabric and hope, Zara Mitchell climbed into bed. Above her hung a new photo, her with Ethan at the center's opening, both grinning at the camera. Grandma Rose kissed her forehead. Your mama would be so proud of you, baby girl. I hope so, Zara whispered. I just did what she taught me. I saw someone hurting, and I stopped. And you changed the world, Rose said softly. One brave moment at a time. As sleep claimed her, Zara dreamed not of poverty or struggle, but of tomorrow. Of her grandmother's shop opening, of Ethan learning Braille music to play piano, of a center full of children who knew they mattered. The world hadn't become perfect, but it has become better. And sometimes, better is enough to change everything.